Laughter will sort of make people come in from outside. Or maybe not. Let's see what happens, eh? At least there's one complete row. That's a win. I did a talk in Russia before Ukraine, back in 2019 or something, in Siberia. Honestly, at this time, there were fewer people than, well, there was about 4. It was the only time I've ever done a conference talk, and I've bought the whole audience a pint afterwards. It was, I mean, that bit was fun, but the talk itself was like, well, I said to them, we might as well sit around a table. Right, let's go. Hopefully, I hope I didn't get anybody in here on false pretenses, right? Because I'm going to talk about some robberies and what we can learn from them, but I might be lying occasionally, so we'll see what happens as we go. So what can we learn from the world's biggest heists? Well, let's crack on. So, I'm James. Nice to meet you all. If you come and talk to me afterwards, that would be fantastic. I'm not a security engineer, or even, I guess I am a security professional, but I was a software engineer. I moved into consultancy. Then I was a VP of engineering, head of platform, stuff like that. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, a company I worked for, a startup, I said to the CEO, if the person in the company that you own that knows most about security is James Birnie, you're in real trouble. And that enabled me to get the budget to hire a head of security. Unfortunately, that startup then started running out of money, and 6 months later or so, I was forced to make him redundant. But then he consulted back to our company, and about a year after that, he was badgering me saying, please come and work with us in this new consultancy I've set up, because the problems that we have in security delivery are the same as XYZ delivery, right? It's just less mature. So we need someone like you, because my background was more in software delivery and making funny systems work, like the people's systems and everything like that. So for the last, coming up for about 18 months, I've worked with Matthew. We've set this company up called Foro. We're doing strategic consultancy, really. I won't dwell on this, but the cool thing about this is we're doing now a couple of gigs on quantum threat preparation. So years ago, before the lockdown, I did a talk on quantum computing and how it was threatening the world's cryptography. And finally, we managed to persuade a client during the back end of last year that they should invest in understanding the threat and getting their systems ready. So if you're working for a company that doesn't even have quantum computers on the threat radar, give me a shout afterwards. I'll happily hand over a business card. We've got another couple of prospects coming up. So we think that's the next big thing coming generally in cybersecurity. So, Oslo. I've never been to Oslo before. How many of you are actually from Oslo? A few. Excellent. Because sometimes I've given a talk in London and I say to the audience, who's from London? And I do this and there's nobody. I'm like, oh, Christ. So I've never been to Oslo before. I got here last night. Now, this won't look weird to any of you if you're from Oslo, but what's striking to me as an English person is how dark it is, right? It just gets incredibly dark. I did notice that Oslo is further north than the Orkney Islands and about level with the Shetland Islands, and if you're from where I am, that's really far north. So I guess that's why it's so dark, but honestly, it really leapt out at me. This building I found interesting. No idea what it was. If you're from Oslo, you probably know. But then there's one immutable rule of every big city, or every city I go to in mainland Europe, which is there is always an Irish pub, without fail. Now, they're nothing like the pubs in Ireland as far as I can remember them, but it's been a while since I've been to Ireland. But a new one on me was I found an English pub named after Winston Churchill. I was like, wow, that's interesting. So I thought, you know what? I bet there's no pubs in the UK named after Winston Churchill. So I Googled it and I came up with one. There's one called the Churchill Arms. What kind of makes me slightly suspicious about it is it says it was built in 1750. So I somewhat doubt that was its original name. But hey, there you go. Who liked the conference merch today? I thought it was amazing. I like to go running, and that was a great set of conference merch. If you didn't get the running gloves, unlucky. I'm sure they work equally well for cross-country skiing. But, So I went out today for a run. If you're from Oslo, you probably know what this building is. I thought it looked amazing. I have no idea what it is because I had no time to check, but it's important enough that there was a bloke with a gun guarding it, so I assume it's something important. There I am, just to prove I did go running, and I did use the Norwegian-style headband ear warmer thing. They're really good for bald people, right? Because you need to sort of sweat out of your head, but keeping your ears warm is important because there's no hair to do that. I show you this sign. This is my Google avatar, just to give you a clue about where I'd really love to go tomorrow before I have to catch my flight, which is, of course, the National Museum, because there's one version of the scream there, I'm told. Yeah. So I'll probably go there if I get time tomorrow. I was intrigued by this as well. I shouldn't have been, but I guess Oslo, I'm not great on geography, is at the north end of a big fjord. Kind of looks that way on a map. So does this count as sea ice, or is it not really sea ice? I don't know, because it's right up north in a fjord. It's pretty sheltered. But I was just kind of, oh, blimey, I didn't expect there to be ice in the sea. Again, it's further north than the Shetland Islands, so maybe I shouldn't have been that surprised. Just so you know, I love that building. That red building was this photo. But as I took the picture, something was making a noise just to my left. And if you're British and you're not from Manchester, one thing that scares the shit out of you is trams. Because they make no noise. We don't know what direction they're coming from. And I mean, I've nearly been run over by trams in Amsterdam. Maybe that wasn't to do with the trams. But I mean, more than once, right? And the other thing when I go to Europe, particularly when I'm running, that confuses me is the zebra crossings, because they have very strict rules in the UK. You get on the crossing, the cars stop. Sometimes people abuse that, particularly in London. And my technique is always to look straight in the eye of the driver and make sure they're stopped, and then I'll go over the road. Unfortunately today, of course, I had this situation. Now, this may not look weird to anybody in this room that isn't me, but remember, we drive on the other side. So as I was approaching this zebra crossing, I thought the driver was doing this. It's really scary. So, of course, a junction that, whoa, looks like that absolutely makes us blow our mind in the UK. It combines all the things that we just don't get anywhere. But it's not as bad as this one that I once encountered in France. If anyone could ever tell me what's going on in that junction, great. Right. Normally I get a warm-up act, but they didn't have the budget, so that's that bit done. I just always have to say this because I give a lot of talks at conferences. Sometimes I mention the client. It's kind of not necessarily the client I'm working with or this client or that client. I do like to mash up the stories. Sometimes I sort of make them together to make it sound better. The Germans have a great word called Treppenwitz. Do you know what that means? It's on there. There's no direct word in English for it. It means staircase wit. It's when you think of a rejoinder after the person made it. So when you're on the staircase afterwards. So you're in a meeting, someone says something, and you think afterwards, oh, I wish I'd have said that. And of course, when you tell the story later, you did say that. You absolutely did. So I cannot promise that if I mention an anecdote from my previous life that I'm not using Treppenwitz. Let's get on with this. I'm going to talk about some big robberies, heists, whatever. What opportunities might have been missed? What can we learn from them? And like every talk at every conference, there has to be top 5 lessons at the end. That might be a lie. We'll see. That coffee's good from that little pop-up stand outside. I recommend it. Cool. Let's talk about, is everybody familiar with these 3 robberies? I've just realized that when I was editing the slides earlier, that's not the order that I'm going to talk about them. That doesn't count as a lie, though. A lie has to be intentional. That's just an error that I've just spotted. I'm guessing nobody in the room hasn't heard of Bitcoin. One of the interesting things, there's lots of interesting things about Bitcoin, but Bitcoin and similar, they facilitate crime in many ways, right? And, people think that Bitcoin's anonymous, which it's far from anonymous, because the blockchain has a record of every single transaction that's ever taken place. It's an immutable record, of course. And in order to convert Bitcoin into real money, or Ethereum into real money, you have to go through a crypto exchange. Well, that's if you want to convert it to dollars or sterling or any Western currency. Not sure how it works in Russia. You can probably convert it to money down the pub in Russia, who knows. But that means that KYC exists in Bitcoin. So laundering heist money is as problematic with Bitcoin as ever. But one thing it does have over traditional ways of robbing stuff is that it's portable, right? If you steal $10 million worth of crypto, you don't have to put it into God knows how many suitcases to carry it across borders, right? So for that reason, a lot of the biggest, well, almost all the biggest robberies that there have ever been are to do with crypto in the last few years, and it's only going to carry on being like that. That's the current price of Bitcoin. This is just another fun fact. It's gone down a bit in the last few months. It peaked at just over 90,000 US dollars. It's down to 50-odd thousand. This was earlier this week. But if we look at it over the last 5 years, it's still a pretty good bet. 5 years ago, it was 15,000. So it's gone up, what, 4.5 times in the last 5 years. So that's a pretty good return on your money. If we look at this longer term graph, we'll see that back on the 4th of November 2017, it was trading at 5,600. The reason why I picked that one out is because that was about the time that certain of my colleagues said to me, you've got to invest in Bitcoin. And they were looking at it all the time. How much spare cash have you got? And I don't know how much I had at the time. Anyway, they're all millionaires and they've retired, and I'm here. So I think you can guess whether I invested or not. Who's heard of the Lazarus Group? Yeah, a few. So the Lazarus Group is the North Korean state nexus. They are pretty good hackers, and they generate funds for the North Korean regime. So a lot of both of the big crypto heists I'm going to talk about were down to them, and they're in the news all the time. They are stealing stuff all over the world to fund, well, kind of everything, I think, in North Korea. Because you pretty much, I think they trade with Russia, they trade with China, but they're cut off from the rest of the world. They constantly need US dollars to fund the bits of nuclear weapons they buy and stuff like that. So the Lazarus Group, I don't know who called them that, one of the threat intel groups, no doubt, is very important to their economy, I guess. Yeah, they did the Sony hack. That's an interesting one. If you're interested in just lols in hacks, there was a guy, it was the guy that did Family Guy, I think, or one of those things. He made a film which was a pastiche about, it was called An Interview with a Dictator or something, and it was about somebody interviewing a dictator that looked suspiciously like Kim, and then he was hired to be a CIA hitman. And that's why the Sony hack happened. The North Korean group went after Sony because Sony was the distributor. They ended up cancelling the film. I think you can get it in various places. Sadly, I've never seen it, so I don't know if it's any good. Moving on, yeah. Interestingly, this is a year ago now, just coming up for a year ago. North Korea is the third biggest holder of Bitcoin in the world. There you go, who knew? After the US government and the UK government, that was true as of then. And that's as a result of all these thefts by the Lazarus Group. Right, one or two people had heard of the Lazarus Group. Has anybody heard of Axie Infinity? No hands going up this time. So, Axie Infinity, it's a computer game, or was a computer game. Don't know if it still exists. It got really popular apparently during the lockdowns. It's one of these games, I don't know, I haven't played computer games since I had children. Don't have time. But it's to do with breeding things called Axies, and then you fight them against other Axies, and then you can trade them. Now, my children, my older children, my two old girls, they both played Roblox a lot. So I'm sure some people in the room have children that play Roblox, but some people in this room are so much younger than me, they probably play Roblox themselves. And what happens with Roblox is it has an in-game currency called Robux, but it has like a black market currency off the game in real life, where people do trade their Roblox stuff for money, and people get burnt all the time, you know. And every game there's ever been before, you know, that has an in-game economy, there's always a black market economy that grows on the side. And the reason for that is because the game developers, the game owners, don't want to hold people's money. If they trade in real currency, then they're going to be subject to, in the UK, FCA regulations and whatever the financial regulators are all over the world. So they can't build a game economy based on dollars or GBP or any fiat currency, right? So what Axie Infinity is the name of the game. Sky Mavis, the game developer, they thought, well, why don't we base the game economy on crypto? Because crypto isn't yet regulated in the same way as dollars or pounds or whatever. So that's what they did. You build these things called Axies. They're based on those salamander things. What are they called? Axolotls. And you trade them for Ethereum. And that all works really well. And they found that trouble is Ethereum trades take too long. They needed the ability to make trades happen like real time. So instead of using the Ethereum blockchain, they made what they call a side chain called Ronin. And all the in-game trades take place on Ronin. And then there's something called the Ronin bridge that connects the Ronin sidechain with the Ethereum main chain. If my soundboard was working, I'm saying to the chap at the back, I would at this point play the music that comes off at the start of Jaws, you know, to indicate there's danger coming. But just play it in your head, you know, or whatever works culturally for you in terms of danger comes. You can see that there might be some sort of weakness there, right? Because the Ethereum blockchain is a thing, this is a thing, they've built something that joins the two. Yeah, that probably sounds like a seam in the system, doesn't it? Anyway, there's a bit about the Ronin sidechain. I always do this when I give these talks. I forget that I've probably said everything on this. Let's just read it quickly. The Ronin bridge, oh yeah, I'm glad I did this because there is a bit. So on Ethereum, usually the way that things work, the way that things can happen, there is a smart contract. I don't have time to go into what smart contracts are, but they work. Smart contracts are immutable. They sit there and they are instructions to do stuff. Now, when you want to execute a smart contract, you have to give it the parameters, and there will be rules about how to make that actually execute. So usually in Ethereum, and believe me, I've been studying this, but I don't understand it fully. I'm not the world's expert. They call it proof of stake, I think. Is that right? Yeah, because the Bitcoin blockchain works on proof of work. Anyway, suffice it to say, there were 9 votes that could vote on a transaction on the Ronin sidechain, and 5 of the votes needed to vote in favor. So the idea with that is you distribute the responsibility, so no one person can steal all the money, right? So anybody can say, let's do this transaction, but a majority of those 9 nodes need to agree to it. You might notice an impending problem here. Sky Mavis owned 4 of the nodes, right? So in their eyes, they've distributed it. There are 5 other nodes around the world. I don't know. I don't have visibility in how they chose where those nodes lived, but Sky Mavis themselves owned 4 of the nodes. So sometimes I give a talk abroad and I try and make a joke and it falls flat, and I always say, maybe that joke doesn't work outside the UK. This joke, on the other hand, I think is just a crap joke. What I've done is I've put a 4 in a shadow to say I'm going to foreshadow something. You're welcome to groan, or even I'll give you a moment to leave the room if you want, because honestly, I think that is crap. So just a bit of foreshadowing. Does everybody, surely you can work out what I'm saying there, right? It might involve fishing. Maybe that's a crap pun as well. And there's some dusty stuff under some dust sheets, that's been lying around in storage for ages. Yeah, that might be a bit of a clue. What else is there? Hygiene. Boring thing, right? Hygiene. But, bad things happen if you ignore it. That's enough. Again, I'd have the Jaws music at this point if my soundboard was working. All right. How did this hack go down? Now, this is probably why people have come. I now apologize in advance for the graphics. My daughter is at university studying art and history of art and stuff. I offered to pay her to do the graphics, but she said she didn't have time. So I obviously used ChatGPT. So the inconsistencies will pop up from time to time. You're welcome to laugh at them. So how did this go down? So this happens a lot. And the Lazarus group are really good at this. Who thinks here that LinkedIn is a vulnerability for the company they work for? I would expect every hand to go up if you're a security professional. So it's very easy on LinkedIn to find out where people work, what they do. And also, any company with any reasonable degree of employees, you can work out what their tech stack is, right? You can even start to work out their org structure based on what people have done, what their experience is, and who they've worked for. So it's fairly easy to identify developers. And we all should know that developers are a big weak point in most networks. Because developers need to do stuff, and then they're not going to muck around with PIM unless you make them. So we'll come back to that later. So some person at Sky Mavis gets offered a job, really good job opportunity, right? I guess this is the fishing part. So, of course, they do interviews with people. My guess is that the people they're talking to probably never switch their cameras on, but hey, I don't know, maybe they employed someone in the right country to make it look good. They got through the early interviews. I can't even read this on this screen. So, of course, as often happens in the software engineering world, they get given a tech test. Is that a thing? Have I said that? Does that translate into other languages? I hope it does. So it's thought that this tech test, and I'm sure this has happened to a lot of you in this room. It happened to me. Well, I didn't get hacked because it was before hacks, but years ago, I got sent tech tests when I worked for ThoughtWorks, and I used to send them out, right? So this one apparently is thought is like a Docker file. So expand the Docker file, do the tech test, and send us the results. I think you can probably see where this is going. So the Docker file expands, whether it's a Docker file, some sort of container, installs some malware on that computer, right? So that's great because they've pwned that computer. I don't have visibility in what the Axie network was, but there's a good chance that when you pwn a computer, you've also got the whatever access tokens are lying around. If it's a Windows computer, Christ, you own the whole network, don't you? It might be a bit more difficult if it's a Linux machine, a Linux-based network. So the malware's there. We have to assume he does the tech test. Well, it might not have been a he, like the reports I've read didn't say he. I don't know if they got the job. We can assume probably not. So, his computer's pwned. I quite like that picture. The little guy looking in the dark there in the background. Got the keys to the castle. What do? Well, they do their recon. This is, I think, fairly unforgivable. With those creds, the attackers were able to get ownership of those 4 voting nodes I mentioned earlier. So they've got 4 of the 5 voting nodes that will enable them to execute a transaction on their own in sidechain. Not enough, obviously. So now they've got to compromise one of the external 5 voting nodes, right? So you would think that makes things difficult. How do they do that? It's not really publicized where those 5 nodes are outside of their network, but they're other companies, they're other entities, they're other organizations. I've read 2 different explanations of this. I'll go with the first one first, which was in setting up the infrastructure they needed to be a voting node, they had to have developer creds on those machines. Some other reports I've read say it was to do with Sky Mavis had set up a DAO, a distributed autonomous organization, which I don't have time to talk about, to vote when it was busy times. Either way, either because of a developer cred that wasn't cleaned up or a temporary access to this DAO that wasn't cleaned up. So something that wasn't cleaned up, there were access tokens there that enabled the attackers to get control of a 5th node. So I think you can guess where this is going. They pwned the Ronin bridge and onward, as the guys on Risky Biz say, to great victory for them. They managed to siphon off 625 million-ish in US dollars. This was in 2022, I think. So you can do the maths. That's probably worth a lot more now. It was mainly in Ethereum and USDC, which is I think that's a stable coin, which is one of these coins that's linked to the US dollar. So that I suppose is as good as US dollars. Although you've still got to transfer it out, right? And then therein lies, oh shit, did that go? No. The problem for the Lazarus group, you've got to cash the money out, right? So I won't dwell too long on this, but they've got all this crypto assets. They need to convert it. The North Korean people still need to convert it into dollars in order to use it. There was a service, which was a DAO, called Tornado Cash. It was set up by 3 men, and a DAO is a distributed autonomous organization. You can set up, and I'm halfway through doing this. It's one of these things where, you know, as a software engineer, or in my case, an ex-software engineer, you think to yourself, how hard can it be? So I sat down to study it, and I really want to do a talk on DAOs and hacking smart contracts. So I started learning this stuff a few months ago, and like after a few weeks of, how hard can it be? I'm like, yeah, it's pretty hard. So I've got some work to do. But a distributed autonomous organization is an organization that is defined purely by the smart contracts that govern what it can and can't do. So the way that Tornado Cash works, and the founders are adamant that this was a privacy service, is you pay it some crypto, you pay into it, you activate a smart contract by paying X Bitcoin into it. Then that smart contract, which is immutable, it basically says, James Birnie has deposited 10 Bitcoin. But then it's all in the background, it's all off ledger. So I'm now, later on, I can say, okay, transfer part of my Bitcoin to this Bitcoin wallet. So it breaks the chain of custody, right? So that's called a Bitcoin mixer. Tornado Cash was supposed to be based on privacy. It was supposed to be enabling Bitcoin to be private. And in a way, it does that. Problem is, as soon as the American authorities found out that the Lazarus Group was using it to launder funds, they sanctioned it, which caused a bit of an uproar. Famously, an activist, because the sanctions said that anybody that pays money into or receives crypto from Tornado Cash is subject to the government sanctions, right? So an activist paid some money into Tornado Cash, and then made microtransactions to loads of famous Americans and loads of people in the government, and then asked, are these people now subject to arrest? So it kind of illustrated the absurdity of it. All 3 founders are subject to sanctions. 2 have been arrested and jailed. 1 is out on appeal in the Netherlands. The other one is going through an appeals process in America. It's all very murky. The 3rd is beyond the reach of American justice in America. That's the latest for that money. And of course, Tornado Cash being a DAO, a DAO, it can't be shut down. So it's still there. It still functions as a crypto mixer. And actually, you can now use it again as a privacy tool. So if you want to buy coffee for, if somewhere does take Bitcoin and be truly private in your transaction, you could use Tornado Cash to do that. The sanctions were removed last year sometime. So, it does function as a privacy thing. I wouldn't recommend laundering 600 million US through it, though. Up to you. If you've got 600 million to launder, good luck to you. All right, who's heard of the Louvre? Yeah, I'd have thought so. Converted Royal Palace in Paris. That's hard to say. Oh, come on. We all know what the Louvre is. It's got the Mona Lisa in it, right? I want to talk about this robbery because, funnily enough, it has similar failings. So, what happened? I guess we're all familiar that there was a robbery in the Louvre, right, last year? Yeah. Oh, here's that terrible joke again. My apologies. Yeah, I really wanted the sound effect here for the clown music. Is that universal, that clown music that says there's some real clowns at work here? So imagine that music, go on, because it is a clown show. So this is what happened. Oh, and by the way, this is where you get a really good idea of what happens if you lose patience with getting ChatGPT to make your pictures. So, first of all, the museum opened at 9:30. I thought that picture wasn't really useful in terms of this presentation, but it's the only one that actually made complete sense, so I thought I'd leave it in there. Apparently, 2 gang members turned up on a boat. So it's right next to the River Seine. So they turned up on the River Seine side. From what I've read, I was reading, there used to be loads of street-level entrances to the Louvre, and they've closed them all. And the only way in now for the public, as a rule, is underneath that glass pyramid that's at the front. So all the street-level entrances, they've permanently closed. So they turned up in a boat. So, yeah. A bit like how many times have we heard about pen tests where they get in through the back door because, you know, the alarm was pissing everybody off, so the security guards just leave it open. It was that sort of thing. Now, you'll notice there's a slight error on this next picture. They used a furniture lift, which apparently are very common in Paris, to get up to the first floor and break into the building. But no matter how hard I told ChatGPT, it had the two men climbing out of the building. The only criticism that it actually listened to, I said, can you please put them in yellow and orange jackets so it's consistent with the description. So they go up there on a furniture lift. They then break their way into the building. They didn't start to destroy their furniture lift with disc cutters, despite what ChatGPT insisted on showing us. They broke in through the window using disc cutters. I particularly like the deliberate error in the next picture, which is, according to the reports I read, I didn't write any of the reports, they then threatened security guards because they set an alarm off, which it did pretty well, right? It set the alarm off, you can see that. They then threatened some security guards with their power tools. Interestingly, the security guards were armed with the same power tools. I cannot vouch for the authenticity of that piece of the picture. And apparently that was enough to see the security guards off. Frankly, that's unsurprising, right? Because presumably they didn't carry anything more fearful than a circular saw. So then they used the furniture lift to get back down to ground level. There were two guys waiting for them in mopeds, and they sped off on the mopeds. They did drop Empress Eugenie's crown on the way. I don't know if it looked like that. Probably not, because that's ChatGPT's notion of a crown, which rather looks a bit like the UK imperial crown, which is in the UK crown jewels. So they dropped Empress Eugenie's imperial crown, but they still got away with 8, it's over there, 8 items of jewelry worth over 100 million, it says. I bet they got nowhere near that amount of money, and I bet they've all been melted down, and it's absolutely tragic. But there you go. At least with Bitcoin, nobody loses any priceless relics. So that's what happens. Oh God, yeah. Here I have to have a side rant, excuse me. Off by one errors. We've all experienced them in software, right? Now, my partner, I was explaining off by one errors to her recently, and she said, that doesn't happen in real life. I was like, it does. It happens all the time. When I was doing the research for that, some of the reports said first floor, some of the reports said second floor. I'm like, whoa, what? I mean, this really gets my goat, right? There's the ground. The first floor you build is the ground floor, right? Right? At least if you're from the UK. The one above that is the first floor, then the second floor, and so on. Underneath the ground floor, you've got the basement and the sub-basement or whatever, right? And I agree that that is not necessarily logical. In America, they put the first floor at ground level, right? Then the one above that is second and third. So you see where the off by one error is going. I don't know what they call the level underneath. Probably, God, I don't know, the car park. In any sensible country, in any sensible system, you're going to name this floor that we're on is going to be what? I'd say floor 0, right? Then the one above is 1. The one above that is 2. If you are going to go down underground, then you're going to go to -1 and -2. For God's sake, I mean, surely it would be easier to standardize on this than time zones, wouldn't it? Come on, world. And it really winds me up. Of all the things that there's an off by one error when you're trying to research a robbery. God. However, having said that, has anybody noticed the lifts in this hotel? This is not floor 0 in this hotel, it's floor 1. You have to go down to the gym to get to floor 0. Last night when I checked into the hotel, I was trying to get back out to go outside to find somewhere to have dinner, and I ended up in a bloody gym. However, not as bad as an NDC, I'm talking to you. Did anybody here go to NDC Porto 2019? I'm going to guess not. I did, and it still rankles with me that this was the lift in NDC Porto. The ground level was number 1. The one below was -1. There was no 0. What were they thinking when they built that building? Apologies, that is nothing to do with cybersecurity, but I thought I had to get that rant in there. Excuse me. I don't know why they assigned an hour for every talk. There's nowhere we need an hour. What time did I start? 33 minutes ago. It's got a little timer on it, of course. Yeah. So what happened at the Louvre before the heist? This is the interesting part. This is the real clown show. So at the time, it was reported that there was an outage which was thought to have been a cyber attack, which meant that the security cameras were out of action. From what I've read since, that seems to have been discredited. It wasn't that there was a cyber attack, it was just that all their systems were constantly crap and had been for some years. What is known, from what I can read, is that the password for the security systems was Louvre. Whee! And apparently weak default password is the oldest recorded thing with a CVE number, or the oldest recorded vulnerability. And the museum was still running Windows 2000 and Windows XP at the time of the robbery. Whether it still is, I don't know. I'd have thought probably yes. You'd think by now they've probably employed some people to put in place some sort of compensating controls for the fact that, hey, security doesn't exist, but who knows. And it's also, lots of employees have gone record down the years, people that have left the organisation, basically saying that there were 3 separate audits that I think I've called out there by the France's National Cybersecurity Agency. And staff apparently have constantly warned management that their security is rubbish. Does this sound familiar to anybody that works in cybersecurity? I bet nobody in this room has ever had a warning rejected by management, right? Nobody at all. Who knows about Bybit? Yeah, one person's got their hand, well, I wouldn't say up, it was kind of sideways. Yeah, nice. Bybit. I think this is one of the most technically, is cool the right word? Respectable, impressive hacks that I've heard of. Because let's face it, most hacks exploit the usual stuff, right? Or they use, somebody else has done the research on a vulnerability and it's on the list and people just haven't patched it, right? Yeah, there's no skill in that. The Lazarus group did Bybit as well. And I'll talk you through it. So Bybit's a crypto exchange platform. So as I said earlier, if you've got Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever, you want to convert it to real money or convert real money to those, you need to go through an exchange. So by necessity, they handle loads and loads of crypto assets. Quite sensibly, they have a hot wallet, apparently, which is connected to the blockchains. And that enables them to service their day-to-day business, right? So someone comes in and says, I want to buy some crypto, and then they want to transfer some crypto to this person over there for whatever legitimate or illegitimate means they want to do so. So they need some liquidity in their day-to-day. So I guess that's a bit like a shop that keeps money in the till, right? You need that liquidity. But then the vast majority of their funds are held offline in an air-gapped cold wallet, as they call it. And the idea being, and I guess that's a bit like a bank that has, an underground safe behind a locked door and everything, right? That's where most of the money and the gold bars and stuff is stored. So they have to transfer money, I guess, on a regular basis between the cold wallet and the hot wallet, right? So either they need to put more money in to give themselves more liquidity, or there's too much money there in the sort of touchable public realm, so they need to take some out to keep it safe. So that all sounds so far so sensible, right? So in order to facilitate that, you need an easy way of moving from A to B and from B to A. They used a company called SafeWallet that makes software for transferring, to facilitate those types of transfers. We're kind of at the periphery of my knowledge of how all this technology works, so my apologies. They had 6 people who could approve transactions. So the way it works is one of them, and I assume these were all senior people within the company, one of them needs to propose a transaction. So we'll say something like, we need to transfer X amount of Ethereum from the cold wallet to the hot wallet, and it requires 3 others to agree with that transaction. So there's a proposer, and then it requires 3, approvers? Yeah, to agree with it. They used Ledger hardware, Ledger with a capital L, so that's a manufacturer. They make these little crypto devices. I've got some photos of them in the later slides. what they are is they're air-gapped things, they're USB devices, and you plug them into your computer, and when there is a transaction that's being proposed, it comes up on this UI, and this has got the encryption keys hardwired into it, I guess a bit like a YubiKey. So, and then you have to authenticate against it somehow, presumably with a fingerprint or something. So the whole system is supposed to be air-gapped, and it's separating concerns in what sounds like a reasonably sensible way, right? You may say that doesn't sound like it has vulnerabilities in it, that system, and I think perhaps it doesn't, but we'll see. I've just got some notes on the side here. Yeah, Ledger is a manufacturer. ChatGPT told me it makes things called the Ledger Nano S, the Ledger Nano X. They're small USB-like devices. They have a secure element chip. They have physical buttons that help you to approve or disapprove. They have a small screen, which we'll come back to later. And they have isolated signing capability. So the key materials on the device, I think I said that. Yeah, and physical buttons to approve. So it sounds pretty good, right? I guess that's like the old-fashioned 2 keys needed for something. Sorry about that. That's the last time you'll see that crap joke. This is going to involve a fish again. Everything starts with a fish, right? It's going to involve this type of vulnerability, though. This came out, I was astonished. It's got a CVE number. When was this? March of last year, so coming up for a year ago. This vulnerability specifically was about sharing LNK files in Windows, and that's been something that people have done for ages. You know, download this link file, people install it on the desktop, double-click it, malware gets deployed, right? The thing about an LNK file is you right-click on it and say View Source. It then brings up a window which has, I don't know, I think Microsoft did something about this, but at the time of this vulnerability, the window comes up and it's like yay big on your screen. So this vulnerability was about sticking tons of white space in. So you've got the thing that the shortcut does that is benign, and then there's zillions of white space right down here. So you have to scroll down to see it. It will say do something malicious, right? So I think there's a name for these type of vulnerabilities. It kind of feels like I guess it's obfuscation. It's anti-security by obfuscation. It's hiding what it's doing, right? In a way that it probably also plays on fatigue, right? People get MFA fatigue, right? And then they stop reading things correctly. So it's that type of thing. I don't know if there's a general class for those vulnerabilities. You can probably guess what this is illustrating. This is me saying that there might be a supply chain attack involved, because the supply chain is often the weakest point, right? If you've got really good security, yeah, maybe look at the supply chain. So how did the hack go down? It starts off with ChatGPT pictures, like always. They must have done some recon on Bybit and worked out that Bybit's security was really good, right? Or good enough, right? Because they can't compromise enough of those handheld devices to, how are they going to do that? What are they going to do? Like somehow simultaneously kidnap 3 people, and I don't know. So they looked at the supply chain. They compromised something in SafeWallet. Every report I've read speculates that it's probably a developer. Let's just assume it was similar to in the last hack. Somehow they get some high-level creds, right? Again, should SafeWallet allow its developers to do stuff without pimming, whatever? Who knows? So they've compromised Bybit. They then deployed some malware on Bybit. Now, the cool thing, and I've got much more detail on this, but we probably don't have time. They didn't just put some malware that changed everything, right? They put some malware that effectively said, if somebody from Bybit proposes a transaction, do this. So they planted it there, and it was specifically aimed at Bybit. So the early reports of this hack were, when I first heard the reporting, people were saying, oh, somebody was just doing a widespread attack to try and gain creds, and they got lucky they happened on Bybit. That isn't what happened at all. The Lazarus group targeted Bybit specifically through their supply chain, through SafeWallet. So they effectively wrote some code that said, if Bybit requests a transaction, do something naughty. Now, what that did, this is effectively, they planted a new contract on the blockchain. It's there. You can still see it if you're interested. As I say, I would find it impossible to read that. And what that contract did was effectively, what then happened was Bybit made a transfer saying the usual stuff, right? It's run of the mill. It says somebody proposed transferring so many of their Bitcoin one way or the other. It wasn't Bitcoin, Ethereum one way or the other. Then that goes to the approvers. The approvers approve it. Now, they approved a malicious transaction, but, and I'll show you on the next few slides, it's easy to see why they did. So 3 of the approvers approved that transaction, which later led to a row, and I don't know how that got resolved, between SafeWallet and Bybit about who's responsible for this hack. Because SafeWallet, Bybit is saying you got hacked, right? You let this malicious contract go. And SafeWallet says to Bybit, you approved the contract. You signed the thing that signed over $1.5 billion of your crypto assets straight to the Lazarus Group. Because in approving their contract, and apparently it triggered the actual thing, so it gave the attackers a little bit more time to get away with it because it wasn't immediately obvious, apparently. So they got $1.5 billion of crypto. I wanted to sort of show somebody celebrating on the next slide. You can see again that ChatGPT got it slightly wrong because it seems like Kim Jong-un is happy to send money to the rest of the world, which I'm sure he isn't. So I said to ChatGPT, please give me the same picture, but just reverse the directionality of the arrows. And it did that. In the end, and he just seems to be even more happy about that now. Who knows? So I gave up after 4 or 5 attempts. The trouble is it takes too long, and I only had a limited amount of time. This write-up, if you're really interested in the technicality, this write-up is brilliant. This explains exactly what was going on in the hack. This part here, this is showing the off-chain attack. So off-chain, I assume, means off the blockchain, right? So the bits in yellow are where they missed opportunities. So the Bybit, somebody proposes the transaction from Bybit. They say, new transaction, please. Now that triggers the SafeWallet to create this new transaction, but it's already been compromised. This is where the code kicks in that says, if Bybit requests a new transaction, do this. So that then signs out asking for signatures to the people. That message is different from the original, right? But we can only assume that they didn't notice. So it's a bit like what I said with that LNK file. It's just the attackers are relying on the fact that people aren't going to read this carefully. Then it goes backwards and forwards. At this point here, the signers, didn't notice that the message has been tampered. And then it saves the additional signatures because apparently it triggered a different contract later on the blockchain, which required those signatures. So it needed to save the signatures and use them again. So that's the implementation detail. I'd thoroughly recommend that if you're, unlike me, somebody that understands all this stuff a lot better than I do. This is an example of what is going on, right? So this is just me showing you how hard it must have been for anyone to realize. The contract, the smart contract, is in JavaScript, or the parameters to it are in JavaScript. So this is the kind of thing that people might have to understand, right? You see where I'm going? I mean, surely you can do better than that on your UX. The last talk I came to today was about UX. Yeah. Someone could have thought about it. And this made me laugh when I was reading this a few weeks ago, to simplify the code, and the person writing the article wrote that. And I looked at that and thought, that's not simplified it enough for me to understand what's going on. So is it really going to simplify it enough in the head of one of these 6 approvers who presumably are business people and not software engineers? Who knows? We can assume not. And this kind of summarizes what happens. The malicious JavaScript, you can read that. So it's effectively replacing the data with something that looks very similar to do something malicious. And whether it's like MFA fatigue or it's obfuscating, that's what they did. This is from the same article. This is the UI that these are examples of what they would have seen. I can see that the brand of these little handheld things is not the same brand that was mentioned in the other report, but I'm assuming it's similar. So the people that wrote this blog are probably got better information than me. So if that's the extent of what you see, it's easy to see why what looks like just a run-of-the-mill thing, right? I don't know how often they approve these transactions, but they're like, it's another one. You know, John proposed it, so I trust John, so yes. They might even have been in the same room, who knows? Or close enough so they just send an email saying, I'm transferring 10 million. Can you just sign it? You know, so who knows? I don't know. I bet they weren't air-gapped to the extent that everybody... I bet there was some mutual trust between these people which shouldn't exist, right? So it wasn't operating in a zero trust fashion. That's just my speculation. But I doubt that it would have worked in any other way. All right. Those are the hacks. Those are the 3 robberies. Missed opportunities. The usual stuff. It was phishing. Why did they not notice the malware? Did they not have EDR? Huh? Really? Axie Infinity was designed badly. It wasn't really a distributed network. They owned 4 of the 9 nodes. That's not a distributed network. They had bad hygiene. They left stuff lying around. Bybit, again, starts with a fish. Did they do a proper supply chain audit on their suppliers? Maybe, maybe not. But if they had it done and their suppliers had given them assurances, maybe they'd have a better case in court. Who knows? Yeah. Did they really think that UX that we just looked at was good enough for transferring millions and millions and millions, potentially? Did they not think about maybe a compensating control? Just like my bank app only lets me transfer £10,000 at a time, which is a lot of money. But it's still a compensating control for someone nicking my phone and cutting my finger off to get my fingerprint, right? Clearly, they didn't have compensating controls. The Louvre, yeah. That comes down to just nobody cares about security, right? So, what can we learn? This is the payoff, right? You know what? I think everybody in this room knows this stuff, right? What can we learn from these attacks? Has anybody learned anything new in terms of how attacks happen by me describing it? My guess is probably not. I mean, you might have learned a bit about smart contracts from my sort of sketchy knowledge of it. But ultimately, these attacks have not changed in character since I've been working in cybersecurity, since I've been working in computing, right? It's, you know, even like the insider threat thing, it all starts with a fish. That's what happened in the 1960s in gangland in London, right? You didn't rob a random van, you paid the driver. You paid the driver to take a kosh over the head and took all the money, right? It's always been a thing. So do we in this room really need to learn lessons from these? I'm not sure. So the title of the talk, this was the lie that I was saying earlier. What can we learn from the world's biggest heists? Sort of maybe it should be, who should be learning from these, right? Because I'm not convinced it's us, right? So this is what I'm saying, like, I don't know if you can read that. In cybersecurity teams, we've probably all had these type of issues, right? I got this list off ChatGPT. I said, find me a list of common complaints from cybersecurity teams. The things that problem this. So it sort of boils down to we don't have the right tooling, or maybe it's not configured correctly, right? Maybe we don't have the right staff or the right skills. So on and so on and so on, right? We can't keep up with the changing threat landscape. Oh, damn it, there's an extra bullet point there. Didn't check it closely enough. Yeah, at least the picture looks nice. But what's the biggest problem? The biggest problem we have in cybersecurity? I'm going to let that hang in. You think about it. This is what I think. Is it lack of resources? Do we lack resources, or is it lack of expertise? Is it lack of the right tooling? I don't think so. I think the biggest problem we have in security is that. The biggest problem we have is getting the rest of the business to give a shit, to understand that there is even a problem there, right? If you take what happened last year in big business in the UK, Jaguar Land Rover clearly didn't give a shit about security. Neither did Co-op, neither did M&S. They damn well do now. But Jaguar Land Rover was such a big hack that caused the GDP of the UK to go down, right? They had a £500 million government bailout. Pretty sure they care about cybersecurity now, but usually it takes that sort of thing for it to happen, right? So what I'm saying is we need to tell the story better, right? I think since I've worked in cybersecurity, we're not great at telling the story. This example here, does anybody know Darknet Diaries? It's a great podcast, yeah. There was one a while ago about a pen test company. They did pen tests on children's toys, these type of dolls that say stuff, right? And they had a remote control, right? And what they worked out was the thing that you pressed on the remote control that would make it cry or say daddy, daddy, whatever, or mummy, mummy, it was vulnerable to a replay attack. So if you go to the CEOs of the toy company and say, this is vulnerable to a replay attack, they're going to say, get out of the room. What the hell is that? So those pen testers found, okay, they tested it. They did the replay attack so many times that they made the doll catch fire. Now, that's a story you can take to the CEO, right? Because how many of you have had a CEO that sits in front of the board or stands up in front of the company and says, our big goal is to reduce our attack surface? Exactly never. So my big contention is we as cybersecurity professionals, we need to start telling a story, right? So here's the top 5 things you can learn. I even put 6 things there just to emphasize that this is not the important message. You're welcome to take a photo, though. You know what? As I was going through this, I felt they were all of same equal importance, right? I think one thing that we could do better as a group actually is the last couple, right? Zero standing privileges and PAM access, right? All those developers that get compromised and then someone owns the whole network, we should be using decent PIM systems that require them to PIM up and get approval for doing stuff, right? It'll add some friction, but you know, we should, I guess those are my technical recommendations. Those are newest technologies, do that. But basically, the main message is, most importantly, be a storyteller and bring your technology and business leadership on the same journey that you've been on. And then we'll all be happy as this guy. Thank you very much.